There's a very small but noticeable difference in the steel between these two watches, and it affects the way the steel looks and handles the light. After the intro, we'll get into it. Most watchmakers use a 316L stainless steel, and early in its history, Rolex used that same steel. It's an alloy that contains iron, chromium, nickel, molybdenum, and small quantities of silicon, phosphorus, and sulfur. This type of steel is highly corrosion resistant and anti-tarnishing, but it's not corrosion proof. So Rolex changed over to 904L steel, which is less resistant to rusting and pitting, especially with exposure to salt water. Rolex claims to be the first watchmaker to start using 904L steel, starting in 1985 with their Sea Dweller. But other sources claim that Omega was actually the first one to use it in 1972. But the transition for Rolex was gradual, and by 2003, all of their watches were made from 904L steel. And in 2018, they switched all their steel watches to oyster steel, which is their own proprietary form of 904L steel. And we don't know exactly what changes they made, but I suspect they made small changes in the formulation of the steel. So the difference in steel that I'm talking about in this video has to do with the difference in the steel between generations. So my Sea Dweller 43 and Explorer 2 were made after 2018, so they contained the oyster steel. And my Datejust 36 and Submariner Date were made after 2003, so they contain the 904L steel. All four of these watches are unpolished, so the differences aren't explained by polishing. From a distance, the steel in both of these watches look exactly the same, but the closer up you get, the more difference you see in the steel. I have the Sea Dweller on the left and the Submariner Date on the right, and the difference I see is that the Sea Dweller steel, which is the oyster steel, is more of a matte, lighter color finish. And the 904L steel of the Submariner Date has a deeper look to it and more reflective and more lustrous. And the differences also hold up between the modern Polar Explorer and the neo-vintage Datejust. The steel of the Explorer 2 just looks like it has a lighter tint to it. You can especially see it with the lugs and the end links. The Explorer 2 or oyster steel just looks a little bit more flat and matte and less deep and less reflective. Now the question is this difference all due to a change in formulation of the oyster steel alloy, or is there some other explanation? Could it be a difference between the satin brushing technique? If I look close, I can almost see that the brushing pattern on the Datejust is slightly deeper and more pronounced than the Explorer. Or could this be a patina of the steel? Just from rubbing my fingers over the steel with casual use after almost 2 decades of use. And getting up even closer, you can see even more difference in the way that the steel plays with the light. So I'm holding both of these in direct sunlight, and I've reduced the exposure of my camera to get a better picture. Again, the Sea Dweller is on the left and the Submariner is on the right. So you can see with the oyster steel, it has a sharper reflection, and with the 904L steel, especially when looking at the first end links, the 904L steel has a kind of a more diffusion of the reflection, whereas the oyster steel has a sharper, clearer line going across the reflection. So let me know in the comments, have you noticed these differences in the steel yourself, or am I over exaggerating these differences? And do you think the differences are due to a different alloy that they used with the oyster steel? Or could it be a combination of that and a different brushing technique or a patina over time?